As you know, or may not know, this year is the 10th anniversary of Japan Cuts, which means for the last 10 years, we have been showing new Japanese cinema here at Japan Society in New York. We've been growing over the years, and as the 10th anniversary, we think it's prime time to kind of think about what we do. What kind of work do film festivals, niche film festivals like ours do, and also have a discussion with the audience and talk about it and think about what we do and what about Japanese cinema in general and cinema culture in general. And we are so pleased that we have three very distinguished panelists today to talk, to discuss this with us. And so we have Ms. Keiko Araki, who is the festival director for Pia Film Festival. She flew in from Japan, and she's here during her busy schedule to come talk to us today, as well as filmmaker Kazuhiro Soda and Professor Alexander Zaltin. So the way this panel is going to run today is that I'm going to be inviting each of the panelists up individually to talk a little bit about their backgrounds and what their association is with film culture, and also give a little bit of a presentation. Then we're all going to be, our three panelists are going to be sitting at this table, and I'll be moderating up here for the second half of the talk. Then finally, at the end, we'll be opening it up to Q&A, so I hope you all join for the discussion and bring lots of interesting questions, and I hope it can even get heated at times. So without further ado, I'm going to invite our first speaker up, which is Mr. Kazuhiro Soda. He's an award-winning filmmaker based in New York, known for his observational method and style of documentary production, and the author of many books published in Japan. So please join me in welcoming up to the podium.
Hello, I'm Soda, and thank you for coming today. Well, briefly, I'd like to introduce myself, what kind of work I do, and what kind of approach I take towards documentary filmmaking. Well, I was born and raised in Japan, but I studied religion when I was at Tokyo University. Nothing to do with filmmaking. But I had a whim. I wanted to be a filmmaker one day. And I just came to New York to study filmmaking at the School of Visual Arts. At that time, I was only interested in fiction filmmaking, and I learned how to make fiction films. But then when I graduated from SVA, I accidentally joined a company which produces documentaries. And I kind of accidentally started making documentary films for TV. Mostly for NHK. It's a public broadcaster in Japan, kind of like BBC. And I made about 40 to 50 documentaries for them. But then I gradually became frustrated about TV documentary filmmaking, the way they do and the way they approach documentaries. So I started making my own, calling my films observational films since 2005. And I've made 7 films so far in the same style and approach. These are the list of the films. Campaign is my first one. Mental Peace, Theater 1 and 2, Campaign 2, Oyster Factory. These are the films I've been making. And I'd like to show the clip, or actually the trailer of Campaign, just so you know what kind of film I make. By the way, all of these films are available on video on demand. So if you are interested, please watch it online. Yeah, that's it.
自分のポスターがこんだけ貼られることはもうないでしょう。こんばんは、お疲れ様です。山内和彦、改革指針だって取り組んでまいります。
山内和彦、
よろしくお願いします。山内和彦、頑張ってまいります。握手。こんにちは。すいません。
小泉純一郎総理であります。
まだ話があるんだよ。
ごめんなさい。はいはい。
あんたらしっかりしないからね、そういうこと言われるんだよ。
改革進めます。
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So that's campaign. It was the protagonist of the film. Yama-san is my friend from college, and he was picked by the very powerful party LDP to be their official candidate, although he had nothing to do with politics. So I decided to follow him around. And I had no idea what kind of campaign he's going to do, but I just followed him around, and it turned out to be kind of like a comedy, and this one actually was also broadcast here in PBS, so you may have seen it. But well, anyway, I approach documentaries. Actually, all of my films were shot in Japan, so I don't know why I'm living here, but but I don't know why. But all of my films were shot in Japan and about Japan and Japanese culture, my own culture. But when I make films, I call my films observational. And why? What does it mean? What I mean, well, the English word observation or observational has a connotation that you are distant, or you're a third party, you are not involved. But I don't mean that. What I mean is more like kansatsu in Japanese. It is about looking and listening. And I'd like to look and listen, and according to my observation, I want to make my films, rather than I have my preconception and shoot whatever that fits to my preconception. So that's how I approach it. That's the philosophy of my documentary filmmaking. So I came up with 10 commandments of observational filmmaking. I have a background in religious studies, so I have 10 commandments. And number one is no research. I don't do any research before I shoot, because not because I'm lazy. Maybe I'm lazy, but I don't want to have any information about the subject. I want to take a look at it like freshly. I want to have a fresh look at the subject. So no research. Number two, no meetings with subjects. Again, I don't want to have much information about the people I'm shooting about. So I don't do any meetings with subjects beforehand. Number 3 is no scripts, obviously. When I was making TV documentaries, I was always asked or requested, or it was my obligation to write script beforehand, before shoot, which I thought was kind of weird because you know the ending already before you shoot. But you have, beginning, middle, and end, and you even anticipate what the interviewee would say, and you have it in your script. But that's kind of like a recreation of your preconception, right? So you can't really discover anything. So I became frustrated with that approach. So I decided no scripts. So number 4 is shoot alone because I need to be spontaneous. I can't have any other crew member. If I have another crew member, I need to adjust their schedules, right? So I shoot like this, holding the camera myself and also recording the sound, kind of like this. By the way, sometimes I have another person, which is my wife. She's a producer, and shooting alone meaning I don't have a cameraman and a sound person. And number 5, shoot as long as possible rather than short. Number 6, cover small areas deeply rather than covering everything, bits and pieces, to feel you have shot everything. So I want to, because to observe something, you need to limit your subject. Otherwise, you can't go deeper. Number 7, don't set up a theme or goal before editing. Editing too, I don't want to set my agenda before edit. Agenda is something you discover eventually, by editing. And number 8, I want no narration, no superimposed titles or music, because I want the audience to observe what's going on as well. And number 9, use long takes rather than fast cuts, because it gives you more time to observe, what's going on in the film. And last one is pay for the production yourself, which is a hard one, but but in this day and age, if somebody pays for your film, I need to listen to the person. So I want to be self-sufficient. So basically, we pay for the film first, and then sell the film, sell the rights to distributors, and then get the money back by selling the films, and use the money to live and then to make another film. That's we try to create this in a circle, and we've been making 7 films like that since 2005. And but I didn't really, invent everything from scratch. My inspiration is direct cinema tradition, which is American tradition, like Frederick Wiseman or D.A. Pennebaker or Mason Brothers. So I really owe largely to their method and philosophy. Yeah, that's pretty much about the time, right? Yeah. So pretty much my introduction. Okay. Thank you very much.
Right, so that was Director Soda. And just to give a little context here as well, what we're really, really happy about this panel is just how diverse our panelists are today. So Director Soda works both in New York and Japan, and is a filmmaker. So now I'm about to invite Ms. Keiko Araki up here. She is the festival director of PIA Film Festival since 1992. It's a festival that focuses on the discovery nurturing of new filmmakers. And PIA Film Festival is actually the longest running film festival in Japan that was founded in 1977. So this time we're going to hear a little bit from her and her work as somebody who organizes a festival in Japan and shows films in Japan. So please welcome her up to the podium.
Hello, everybody. I'm Keiko Araki. Well, as she introduced our festival, our film festival started in 1977. So it's founded by PIA Corporation. PIA Corporation started in 1972. It's the company built by the 5 college students. They wanted to become a filmmaker. Then the company, PIA Corporation, started to publish the information magazine like Time Out. So they got a big money, actually. So they decided to start the film festival. At the 1977 is sort of the peak. It's really good time for age for the independent filmmakers. You know, this is a Japanese very interesting culture. We have a long history about making a feature film by 8mm film. This is a big culture. So it's a big movement. So they decided to show focus on these unknown young filmmakers make 8mm films. Well, I'm trying to speak in English, but my English is quite limited. So the Marie, she's very, very special interpreter. She's gonna help me if I confuse how to say in English. But anyway, I try to talk in English. So I also have to do the, oh, yeah. So we have about this year, our film festival is 38th edition. And we introduce or we find talent from these independent films for these 38 years, like this number of filmmakers. Maybe you know Kiyoshi Kurosawa mostly nowadays. And these, Shion Sono, also Ryosuke Hashiguchi, and Shinya Tsukamoto especially. Also, Shinobu Yaguchi, he's one of the most popular filmmaker as a comedy, but in 1990s, he sent us feature 8mm films. It's really dark, no comedy at all. So we really learned how young filmmakers change through their careers. Is my English okay for you? And then, well, nowadays, maybe you know Naoko Gigami. Her famous film is Kamome Shokudo. I don't know it's in English title. Or the Mr. Lee San-il. He's getting very famous filmmaker now. And Koji Shiraishi, his new film, Kayako and Sadako, the horror film. It's really success now in Japan. And then there are so many filmmakers. Who you know? Yuya Ishii did the baseball film in Canada. How do you say that? Yeah. Yeah. He's still recently he's the most successful young filmmaker. He started his career when he was 24. He got an offer from Toho, the largest film company. It's a successful case in Japanese film history nowadays. And then other filmmakers. These filmmakers is quite new. The Yuki Yamato. She's the most popular filmmaker nowadays, and a very interesting female filmmaker. So hope you remember her name. She's getting very famous soon, I think. But anyway, These filmmakers, they made the film by themselves, and we focus on these young unknown filmmakers, continue to do competition. And next page, please. So my assistant make this one. So English is not exactly correct, but I hope you understand. So the first starting point, we really want to introduce the unknown 8mm filmmakers to public. There are almost no opportunity to show their film at the cinema. They never had the experience to show that their film on big screen. So what we wanted to do is we treat these super 8mm films as a general film. That's why we start the film festival. And also we try to invite many famous producers or critics or filmmakers and artists and to watch their films. So first 10 years, like Nagisa Oshima, Matsumoto Toshio, Terayama Shuji, these famous people joined the selection member. They have been spending their time for selecting these unknown young filmmakers' works, and I try to get the opportunity to get into the sort of the professional industry. Then, but after 10 years, we really realized these entry filmmakers wanted to get prizes. So we changed the system into competition, completed competition. Then, so 1988, we start the competition system. The first grand prize winner is Tsukamoto Shinya. We change the jury member every year. 5 famous artists going to join as a jury member. It's a really tough job to select a jury member to change every year. I'm really fed up with that. Yeah, now I'm really trying to get the last member of this year. For this year, I haven't get yet. But anyway, so next please. Then also we do the invitation showcase. It's meaning that in 1970s there are almost no opportunity to watch the famous foreign filmmakers' work. So we are only one film festival at that time. So we tried to do some retrospectives like François Truffaut or Luis Buñuel and these filmmakers. Then after that, Tokyo International Film Festival start. So we just focus on what we have to do. So we always keep to put our energy for finding new talent. Then, but we still continue some retrospective. Especially in 1980s, there are no way to introduce Chinese independent filmmakers because Tokyo International Film Festival can't do that for the national something, 国際的協約
So sort of a border conflict in between the two countries.
Yeah. So 90s and even early 90s, we still continue to introduce Chinese independent filmmakers because we are the only one independent film festival in Japan. Have no national money, have no public funds. So we are really independent. So then, next. Then also we decided to produce a film with these young filmmakers. One of the prize winners, because we really find there are no opportunity to make a debut film for these 8mm feature filmmakers. We have been dreaming one day the producer coming to knock their door and gave them an opportunity, but nothing happened, we realized. Then we decided to produce the film by ourselves. So now we finished we done 23 films now, So this is a list of the 20 films, no, 23 films. Maybe some of them you've already watched. Maybe that one, A Touch of Fever, the Ryosuke Hashiguchi's, was the quite successful film, and it was traveling all over the world. And Hashiguchi Ryosuke is the first, and maybe still the only one filmmaker openly gay. And this is a gay film, and very brilliant film. And also the next one, Down the Drain, by Shinobu Yaguchi, was in New Director's New Films at that period, 1993 or something. And others, actually, we done 23 films, but only 4 films we could get the money. But others, we really lose our money. But anyway, but so that's really difficult to do the commercial side. It's impossible to success that. But anyway, some films go to Cannes and some films traveling the world, and so it's a new experience for filmmakers. Most of them never went to abroad. Even most of them didn't have any, even a passport. They spent all their money and time for making film. No experience for other things. But anyway, my English is so bad, sorry. And so the 38th is coming in September. I'm on the deadline for our flyer making. So last night I do that whole night and didn't sleep at all. But anyway, so our festival traveling inland domestic tour we have. Now in Kyoto, Kobe, Nagoya, Fukuoka, and Tokyo, of course. Then used to be the peak time is about 10 years, no, 15 years ago, we traveled 10 cities in Japan. Because there are, maybe some of them you know, there are so many public theater, no, public museum in Japan. Huge buildings has theater. And they are searching for something for that theater. So they asked us to do. But nowadays in Japan, there is no budget for keeping that なんだって、なんて言えばいいんでしょう。そういう公共施設の、予算がどんどん削られていて。
So the budget for maintaining such large public institutions are declining rapidly in Japan.
で、入札制になっていて。
So everybody would have to apply to enter into having an exhibition or event.
で、とにかくカット、お客さんとにかくいろんな企画がカットされてるんで全然できなくなっている。
So as a result, a lot of these projects and exhibitions and events are getting cut down in number.
で、とにかくカルチャラルアクティビティがとても難しい国になっているので、映画祭を運営していくっていうのはどんどん難しくなっています。
So I think Japan as a country is becoming a very difficult country to sustain and continue these cultural activities. So maintaining and operating a film festival gets extremely difficult as well.
だんだん日本語で話すと楽になってきました。
It's much easier to speak in Japanese as I go.
で、もうすぐ終わります。その次お願いします。で、これが今年のコンペティションの自主映画の作品ですね。
So this was all the self-financed films from this year's competition.
All digital works nowadays. No films at all. We are also going to continue peer film library. We are holding these works as a library and rent it, and then they pay back the filmmakers a half screening fee. So we continue that about 38 years, and wanted the filmmakers have the pride of how their films can make money, very little money, but で最後お願いします。 This year we did a project with the Berlinale and the Hong Kong International Film Festival. The not super, but Japanese culture is not super 8mm. 8mm works is sort of the film, very important film history in Japan. So we selected quite punk 8mm feature works traveling world now. So I hope that we could get an opportunity to show these works in North America. これで終わりですね。はい。どうもありがとうございます。
Thank you, Arik-san. So now our third panelist here is Professor Alexander Zalton. He is, as of last month, I heard, is an associate professor in the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations at Harvard University. And where's that coming from? And was the program director for Nippon Connection Film Festival in Frankfurt, Germany from 2002 to 2010. So now we have Professor Zalton, who is now based in the US but has worked in Europe and Japan and here, and to hear a different perspective now. And he's about to give us a presentation that will lead into this discussion that we're going to have more about Japanese film culture in and out.
Thanks. How do I switch to the...
Let me do that.
So hello, everyone. I'm, as Aiko just said, I'm going to try and just give a very brief... Try and give a very brief kind of slice of the larger context of how the Japanese film industry has developed in recent decades, more or less. If you look at kind of Japanese film magazines from, say, the 1960s onward, you get the feeling that the apocalypse is coming. So there are constant special issues in various film magazines on the crisis in Japanese film, on how Japanese film is going downhill, on how everything has gone to broken into pieces, and there are no interesting films being made anymore, and so on and so on. And this goes on for decades, right? So every year it's worse and worse, apparently. This changes a little bit in the mid-2000s, and the main reason for that is because there's a change in the larger economic situation in Japanese film, and especially, and this is the symbolic kind of event, for the first time since the early 1970s, more Japanese, or the box office income for Japanese films in Japan rises to a higher level than that of foreign films. So Japanese films make more than 50% of the box office for the first time since the 1970s. So if you look, I'm sorry you'll see 2 or 3 slides of kind of charts. But this is kind of interesting to look at. So really the high point of the perceived crisis is in the early 90s, when film production is at its lowest level since the 1950s, and box office income has gone down, and foreign film kind of dominates the box office. Up to 80% of box office income is from foreign film. So Japanese film is in the dumps, is kind of the perception, right? But that changes throughout the 1990s. There's an upswing, and we can see from the mid-2000s there's a kind of plateau, there's a stabilization. So you can see that on a number of levels. So this is the number of screens, and one thing you have to keep in mind when seeing this, it looks like this is a great development. The number of screens goes up, so there are more places to watch film, but actually, of course, these kinds of numbers hide a lot of things. So the number of screens goes up, but actually the number of theaters goes down. And the reason for that is that multiplexes come in and completely change the situation in terms of how films are seen and what kind of spaces people go to watch them. So all these small art house theaters start slowly disappearing, and that's accelerated in recent years. And suddenly we have multiplexes. And of course, multiplexes show different kinds of films, right, than small art house theaters or independent theaters. So there are a lot of changes hidden away in numbers like this. If you look at the admissions, those as well are at their low point in the early 90s and then go up in the mid-2000s, kind of stabilize and stay at about the same level continuously. And the number of films goes up considerably. So if you compare it to 1996, the number of Japanese films released in the theater has practically doubled, which sounds great. But if you think about the fact that box office income has stayed more or less stable, that means there's less money to go around, and at the same time, the gap between very low budget films and the very high budget films has grown wider and wider. So you have fewer and fewer blockbuster type films and a greater number of really low budget films being released, and the mid-level budget films have basically disappeared. So we were just talking earlier, maybe we can talk about that during the discussion as well, how really budgets have hit rock bottom, where you really films are produced for budgets that are unimaginable, say in the US, for example. You wouldn't even be able to pay for catering on an average independent film in the US with the budget that entire feature films are made in Japan. So interestingly, this kind of, at least roughly speaking, economic upswing and stabilization of the Japanese film industry as a whole coincides with an increase in Japanese films being shown overseas, in terms of film festivals at least. And we have a kind of interesting development setting in, again, in the late 90s, around the early 2000s, where a lot of smaller festivals pop up that are specialized on showing on showing Asian film and Japanese film, right? And of course, there are lots of Korean film festivals and Taiwan film festivals, Chinese film festivals, and so on and so on, that pop up as well. And this is just a selection of some that have been important. So Vancouver was a very early entry in that. The Japanese Film Festival Sydney is also a pretty large festival by now. Some of these actually don't exist anymore. So I think the Barcelona Asian Film Festival has closed down since. Nippon Connection, the film festival that I was involved in, started in 2000. Japan Cuts in 2007, of course. And I remember actually in that first year, Nippon Connection and Japan Cuts collaborated on a video art program. So there was actually a lot of networking there. This is between smaller festivals. And that's also something that was very different to the previous situation. So until this kind of multiplication of film festivals happened, you had basically the major kind of large film festivals, especially centered in Europe, kind of high-profile festivals, where Japanese film would be shown. So places like Cannes, Berlin, Venice, Locarno, Rotterdam. So some of those festivals were more friendly and more open to showing specifically Japanese films than others. But this also meant that you had a smaller number of, or you had a very defined small number of gatekeepers, right? So some people may have heard a name, Tony Raines, who used to program for several film festivals, who basically for a long time decided which Asian films were being shown at large festivals, and not just for Japanese cinema, but for a lot of Asian cinema. And that's not, you could agree with his tastes or not. He did a lot for bringing Asian film to audiences in Europe and the US. But of course, it's never really good if there's one or two people that basically decide everything, right? So what we see is, after this multiplication of film festivals occurred, that we have a completely different variety of Japanese films being shown abroad. So you would basically, until say the late 90s, you would get the kinds of Japanese films that circulated outside of Japan were films that, the type of films that could be shown in Berlin, Cannes, Rotterdam, Venice, right? Ones that fit exactly that narrow kind of specification. And that's a very specific type of art house film, right? Then you have all these festivals popping up that all have different kinds of tastes and different kinds of ideas of what films they want to show. So some show more kind of, I don't know, kind of subculture type, action type films or so. Others stick to a different kind of art house film. Some like to show more kind of popular cinema. Some tend to show a lot of animation, for example. So there's just a whole spectrum of films, right? And for example, the Nippon Connection, where that I was involved in for a long time, this was for a long time the largest film festival for film from Japan, showing 120 films about per year, 140 sometimes, including short films, would show, literally kind of try to show the most interesting films from all kinds of sections of the Japanese film industry. So it really tried to represent the whole spectrum of Japanese film production. So it would show blockbuster films, experimental films, pink films, so-called V-cinema, straight-to-video films, independent films. So just kind of the most interesting films from each section of the film industry, right? Because the Japanese film industry is incredibly large and diverse in terms of its output and production. Now, for the current situation, I think it's really interesting to think about what the current constellation of factors in terms of the larger industry situation and the current generation of filmmakers and so on, what kind of effects that's going to have in 10 to 15 years. Because what we see now in terms of the current situation really has after effects, long-lasting after effects, often in ways that are somewhat unpredictable. And I want to show an example of that. If we look at, a second, it should come up. So if you look at this, this is an interesting example. How many people have seen The Ring? Okay, quite a few, good. The Ring is a really interesting example in terms of where it was foundational for an entire new set of horror film aesthetics in Japan. Of course, influential for horror film all across East and Southeast Asia, but also in terms of the remakes that were then made in the US, for example. But that set of aesthetics actually was developed in 1980s 8mm film, right? So this is a film that you'll basically never get to see, Toneriko in the upper left corner. The only reason I have that is because I received a DVD from the director directly. But otherwise, this is never shown. It's not out on available commercially or so. But these were films that were seen by a lot of people. As Araki-san just mentioned, the 8mm film scene in Japan was incredibly large and incredibly influential for later generations. A lot of people saw these films, and they were in circulation. And when in 1997, the scriptwriter Takahashi Hiroshi and the director Nakata Hideo got together to think about how to shoot the film version of the novel, Ring. They both remembered that they liked the films of Tsuruta Norio, the horror films that he shot in the 1980s on 8mm film. They liked the kind of aesthetics that he had at the time developed. So they very deliberately applied those to shoot Ring. And actually, Tsuruta also shot some straight-to-video films in the early 90s called Truly Scary Stories. Those are actually available on DVD in the US as well, that were also in the same mode. And they picked up on that and made it into a worldwide success with The Ring. So you can see how something that starts with in a fairly kind of small subsection of Japanese film production then branches out to become incredibly influential, not just within Japan, but far beyond the borders of Japan. So a lot of the ways that influence travels is very indirect and very unpredictable. And it's very interesting to think about what the current situation is going to result in say, 10 or 15 years from now. And I think I'll stop there, and maybe we can go into more details. Sorry, the music was kind of droning, but yeah, we can go into details maybe during the discussion. Okay, thank you.
So as you can see, we kind of have this like wonderful, diverse panel here, speaking from various aspects. And so, you know, this panel is really to kind of talk about some of the various kind of think about the current situation. We have been showing Japanese films for the last 10 years, but as you saw in Alex's, Professor Zoltan's list of festivals, we are really quite new. We're only 10 years old, and festivals have been coming up that are niche in the terms of showing either Asian cinema or Japanese cinema. And the other point that I noticed that we were all that our panelists were sort of making is that Japan has a remarkably big output of movies every year. And I actually had this conversation with Araki-san from the airport when she was coming in about just how many are produced. And as one of the programmers of Japan Cuts, we really watch a lot of movies, and it's really, really tough to narrow it down to just almost 30 programs, and we always, you know, are crying over the fact that sometimes we can't even include the films that we really, really want to include. But so I guess with that said, though, I think here we have this wonderful audience who are already very interested in Japanese cinema and come to Japan Cuts. But I have to say, it's a very small number of people if you think about how many people live in New York and even just watch cinema in general. So my question kind of comes to, so what do you think, and I think it's part of the program here, but what do you think are some of the pressures, or what movies do well in America to get the kind of exposure that maybe other films, US films get? And I think living in New York here, we are quite lucky to have international cinema culture. We certainly, compared to other parts of maybe this country or maybe even the world, I think we do have quite a diverse cinema culture. But despite that, I think the number of Japanese films is very little. If maybe from your perspectives kind of can talk about what might be stopping more Japanese films to be shown just outside of places like ours, like at Japan Society.
Me? That's a very tough question. I don't know, but I think one of the reasons is that not many Japanese filmmakers or producers are interested in going abroad. I mean, they don't really think about selling the films to outside the country. That's probably one of the reasons. And because Japan has a fairly big market, it's probably number 2 in the world, I guess. Number 2 or number 3. Yeah. And so if they distribute the films in Japan, they can they have a fair chance of recouping the money. So they don't have the motivation to try to sell the films to abroad. And I don't know. That might be playing part in that. Yeah.
はい、私ですか。
どうぞ。
ですね。 その映画を売るということ、自分の映画を人に見てもらうということに対しての意識がすごく低いんですよ。そこにすごく問題があるんですね。それは多分映画だけじゃなくてあらゆるクリエイティブに対してだと思うんですけども、何か自分の作品を人に見てもらうということに対して積極的になることを阻む空気が社会にあるんですね。そういう人は何ていうか叩かれるというか、そういう社会の空気にものすごく問題があるんじゃないかと常々思っているんですが。
So I think in Japan, production, there's a very low awareness of the fact that film is something to be sold and also to be promoted and also to present and be shown to an audience. And I think this goes also not just film but also other creative outlets as well. The awareness that an art is something to be presented and consumed, there's a very low awareness of this in Japan. And also socially speaking, I think there's a culture of restricting people that seek to present and promote their work. So I think that's a social tendency of Japan. That is a problem.
ソーダさんがおっしゃったことの前の段階で、なんていうのかな、監督とか作った人がそういうことを言っちゃいけない空気それがものすごくあるんですね。これをなんとか壊したいと思っていて、私たちの活動の中で、できるだけそういう会話をするようにしているんですが、社会的なプレッシャーをどうやったら取り除くことができるか、それが取り除かれたら自分の作ったものに対して、作る時の意識も変わるし、できてからの意識も変わるんじゃないかというところを私は担当しなくちゃいけないと思っています。
So to go feedback on a little bit of what Director Soto mentioned, I think we pretty much need to break down this environment, a restrictive environment that really puts down filmmakers who wishes to really actively promote and present their work. So I think it begins by breaking down that environment in Japan, and I think that will help change the consciousness of creators and while they're making film. Not only that, but once they make their film, how to work with the project. I think they'll change their consciousness and awareness.
And so what's kind of interesting to me here is that, so I feel like both of you sort of spoke from a Japanese perspective in terms of, what's maybe stopping people from putting their films out abroad. I was wondering maybe if Professor Zoltan can talk a little bit about maybe, I do feel like these kinds of conversations is a two-way street. I think there has to be also the receiving end, where we're talking about people who need to be curious about other cinemas and maybe talk about kind of the reception maybe in Europe or America, and maybe if there are differences and what makes people maybe more engaged with cinema that's not their own national cinema. Maybe.
Wow, that's a big question. So yeah, there's both, right? There's the push and the pull, and I think Araki-san and Soda-san both outlined very well why the push isn't very strong to circulate films produced in Japan outside of Japan. But the question of the pull is a bit more complicated and very different depending, I think, on the specific context. I think in the U.S., of course, this is changing to some degree, but the big factor is that people aren't willing to watch films with subtitles, right? I mean, that's still kind of the mainstream audience will not watch films with subtitles, right? So it's generally not easy to get audiences to watch films that weren't originally shot in English. Mm-hmm. That means that you're focusing on a lot of niche audiences that might be interested in a specific type of film. Mm-hmm. And that might be, say, in the case of Japan and the US, it's anime fans, for example. And there you have the kind of zone of anime series that are dubbed, but then that pulls fans in, and then they watch subbed anime, and there's a strong culture for that, for example. Right? Probably in Europe, it's different depending again on the country. So France has a strong, actually probably worldwide the strongest market for importing Japanese film. And then again, it's a very specific type of film, and it's often kind of more art house oriented films. But then Italy has a strong tradition of importing Japanese action films, and kind of directors like Mika Takashi or so are very popular in Italy. So it kind of depends on the context to some degree. But in the end, I think generally still Japanese, if you're distributing Japanese film outside of Japan, you have to target a fairly niche and fairly specific audience, right? With one big exception, and that's Miyazaki, Hayao, and Ghibli, right? Which are films that are immensely successful in Japan and that are very successful outside of Japan with a general audience as well. And I was just looking at, before coming here, at some statistics. I don't want to be the statistics guy too much today, but so of the top 10 top grossing films in Japan, in Japanese film history, 6 are by Studio Ghibli, right? That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And of course, if I talk to my students these days, I mean, and I teach Japanese film courses, basically no one has seen live action Japanese film. Even if they're interested in it when they come to a course that's basically focused on live action Japanese film, the one thing that everyone knows is Totoro and Howl's Moving Castle and so on, but and so Miyazaki films. But live action film is basically it's out of the picture, right, for that generation.
Why do you think that is? Just what does stop? Do you think that's also to do with subtitles?
I think it partially has to do
Yeah.
with subtitles. It also has to do with the type of films that have been produced in the last 15 to 20 years. So one of the big reasons for the upswing in the Japanese film industry is that TV has gotten involved in film production very heavily, right? So film right now, live action film in Japan, the very successful big budget films that are the ones that are most probable to travel outside of Japan, are heavily weighted towards TV series made into films, for example, or films that are produced with the TV broadcast in mind, right? Featuring stars that are basically TV stars, not stars for film necessarily. And that's not a type of film necessarily that appeals to foreign audiences, because they're not produced as standalone films. They're produced as part of a media mix, right? So because the novel was a success and the TV series was popular, they're producing a film as well. So the audiences watches them with that in mind. But if you take that away and you just get the standalone film, it's not necessarily the most interesting film to watch for an audience that doesn't have that kind of background. Right?
And so I'm kind of posing this question about the lack or the very small amount of Japanese movies that are coming out internationally. And so, but the other interesting point I felt like Professor Zoltan's presentation was talking about was the box office sales in Japan right now, and how 50% of it is Japanese movies these days. And so maybe to Araki-san, maybe could you talk about, do you think that in itself is an issue, or like what do you think that represents in terms of the fact that national cinema is on the rise in Japan? And does that mean there's people in Japan are maybe seeing less international cinema on the other hand?
ですね、私は全くビジネスにはタッチしないことにしているので、日本映画のビジネスのことを聞かれてもとっても困るんですけども。
So to be completely honest, I don't go anywhere near Japanese, the business side of Japanese film industry. So it's tough for me to respond to this question.
My activity is really only focus on the filmmakers. But まずですね、 音楽と同じようにこの10年間で急激になぜか日本の若いジェネレーションは日本語のものを愛するようになったんですね。映画も音楽も。これはすごく大きな変化なんです。その多分1960じゃない80年生まれぐらいからすごく分かれてるんですね。でどんどん日本のもの日本のもの日本のものになってきたんです。で日本大好き日本が素晴らしいっていう洗脳が始まったと思うんですよ。外国のものはとにかく知りたくない見たくない、そういう空気ができてきたっていうのとものすごくあると思うんです。これは日本の洗脳教育の結果だと思います。話がいきなり大きくなりましたけど
行きましたね。
So I think it connects very much to music as well. Over the last 10 years or so, the younger generation of Japanese people began to really exclusively love Japanese language products and art. And this is a very significant, big change. I think the generation that was born in the 1980s on, they started to really focus on Japan and really extolled the amazingness of Japan and so on. And I think this is part of the brainwashing culture and the mood of Japanese education system that resulted.
それは中国とか韓国が日本を反抗日が教育が高くなったと同時に日本は日本大好き運動が始まってきたっていうのをすごい私たちの中ではいつも話してるんですけども、その日本の映画がビジネスになるということではなく、ビジネスには実際全然なってないです。映画で食べていけてる、例えば今たくさんの映画監督を紹介しましたが、リストの中で映画で食べている人は多分3人ぐらい。映画では食べていけないんです。だからビジネスになってると私は言えないと思ってるんです。じゃあどうしたらビジネスになるのかっていうのは私も常に考えていますが、こうしたらいいって今言えたら私は今頃大金持ちだと思います。
So I think this nationalistic tendency of Japan is very much in sync with the anti-Japan sentiment that arose in China and South Korea. And I think, to be honest, I wouldn't say that Japanese film has turned into a business at all. Not at all, in fact. Of all the amazing filmmakers that I've introduced in my presentation, I think roughly 3 of them probably make a living just by filmmaking. So I always often wonder, how can I turn filmmaking in Japan into a business? But if I knew the answer, I'd be a rich woman by now.
And so I wonder if Soda Kantoku can talk maybe a little bit, as somebody who travels between Japan and US and also abroad, do you feel like there's this rift that's going on? Or do you have any like observations on your end as a filmmaker of who works in 2 different countries and see like, is there kind of a rift going on or anything that you have somehow seen?
I think, well, my strategy as a filmmaker is to I have the reason I work alone basically is that and then do everything. I shoot and I record sound, I edit myself, I even mix the sound, and I even put subtitles myself into the film.
Wow.
So everything can be done in my apartment, basically.
Right.
And the reason why I'm doing it is that I know for sure that I could recoup money to a certain extent, and that's not that much, and because the market right now, the market, Japanese film industry is divided, just like Alex mentioned, that there are a very few number of box office hits, which is produced by TV stations, and they produce, they generate a lot of money in the box office. But most of the independent films do not make too much money. And so if you spend a lot of money producing the film, you would never, ever recoup the money back. I mean, get the money back. So you need to keep the budget lower. And that's really rule to be able to make ends meet as a filmmaker and keep going. Otherwise, I mean, you just make film and then you have a lot of debt and you might feel better, but I mean, then you won't be able to make another film. So yeah, but I don't think, I have a feeling that's not very really understood by many filmmakers in Japan. Maybe because I was educated in the United States. I have this feeling that you need to make ends meet as a as a filmmaker. You are also a business person as well. I mean, you're an artist, but you need to be a good businessman to be an artist. And that kind of mindset, I was kind of educated in the United States, but in Japan, I don't feel that talking to other filmmakers, they are not really thinking about making ends meet. They want to make films, and they have this desire as an artist, and they put in everything they have, and come up with a film. But oftentimes it doesn't really make sense as a financial endeavor. So I think that's probably happening in many films, in many independent films.
Do you think that then, so what I thought was really interesting was how kind of, maybe through Araki-san's presentation, I was noticing kind of the shorter distance I feel between independent cinema and then also studio filmmakers, and how there's definitely a connection. For example, these filmmakers that you listed, most everybody in this room recognizes their names because they've made a name for themselves in one way or another, which makes me think that the line from coming from a very independent scene to going into a studio system is maybe a little bit shorter or more direct somehow. Or I was surprised by just how many of these famous filmmakers had come out of Pia Film Festival. And so do you feel like this general attitude that's in independent filmmaking does show within the bigger picture of Japanese cinema? Does that make sense? Kind of, yeah, or anybody.
今スチューディオって言っていますけど、日本に実際スチューディオがあるわけではないので、日本にはスチューディオないですから、東宝も松竹も日活も大映も角川もスチューディオを持ってないですから、もう今全部制作委員会システムで、リスクを拡散するためにもうクレジット見れば分かると思うんですけど、10社とか20社がお金を少しずつ出し合って映画を作っているんですよ。でその状態で何が起きるかというと、相田さんもちょっとお話ししてましたけども、プロデューサーと名前がつく人が50人ぐらい映画の中にいるんですよ。で全員が何かを言いたいわけ。全員が何かをお金を出した分権利を主張して何か自分の意見を入れたいと思う。そうすると制作委員会の会議だけでもめちゃくちゃになってしまうんですよ。で何を作りたいのか分からなくなっていくんですよ最後。で誰が責任者か分からなくなっていくんですよ。それが日本映画をダメにしている最も大きな原因なんですね。つまり映画は一体誰が作っているのか、何が映画のコアになるのか、そこが分からなくなっているのが全ての不幸で、これはもし同じことを他のビジネスでやったら大失敗だと思うのに、映画だけそれが許されている、そこが間違いなんですよ。それは多分映画というものを誰も理解しないで作っているからだと私たちの中では思っているんですね。だから私たちはインディペンデントの世界なので、監督というものを中心に映画を作るっていうことでずっと考えているんです。もうそれしかないと思ってるんです。
So you mentioned studio, but in Japan actually there are no studios anymore. Although Toho, Shochiku, Dai, and Kadokawa, and so on, these major film companies, they don't have a studio anymore. So what's happening today is that they all operate on a film committee system, and they're trying to disperse risk as much as possible. So when you see a film, there are about 10 or 20 companies that pitch in a very small amount of money to create these projects. And what's happening now in Japan is that there are about, in one film, there are probably over 50 people that call themselves a producer, and they all want to say something about the film. So during these film committee meetings, it's a pretty crazy situation because they lose track of who's responsible for the project and what they really want to make. And I think this is the major reason and the major cause of the degeneration of Japanese film. And this situation would not be tolerable in any other business, but it's somehow it's somehow tolerated in the film world. So it's a very peculiar situation, and I think this is happening because nobody really understands the creation of film and what sort of undertaking it is. And I work in the independent film world, so we always believe in the stance that you need to have the director at the helm of the project.
And it sounds like Soda Kantoku has managed to do that by being a one-man production.
Exactly, that's the strategy.
Right.
That's the magic. I mean, I'm one of the very rare, filmmakers who make ends meet by only making films. But that's only possible because I am trying to manage everything in a smaller scale. And yeah, in terms of, you said there's no studios in Japan, but I'm kind of like a mini studio with my wife.
We have a studio right here.
Yeah, just apartment, but it's kind of like a studio because you shoot. You have your camera, you shoot, and then you can edit, and nowadays you can even make a digital cinema package yourself. If you know how to. So I think that's actually we have this technical environment which is easier for independent filmmakers to make ends meet. Before digital revolution, it was almost impossible because the film itself costed a lot. So my style of filmmaking was not possible before. So if we are aware of this change of the technical situation, it's not entirely impossible, actually. It's possible, actually. But the problem is, I think many filmmakers are still thinking in the old ways, like the old way of filmmaking still stays as a tradition, and people still follow that, and having the same kind of mindset, which already should have died 20 years ago. Yeah, that's something. That might be one of the reasons.
I think also maybe one thing that's important is how filmmakers are trained and where they learn to become filmmakers and kind of find their own preferences and styles and so on. And that's of course very different often also for feature film and documentary film, right? So I mean, being a one-man studio is a bit trickier in feature film, I think, than it is for documentary film.
That's right.
But if we look at the kind of larger film system and also in attitudes of filmmakers, I think you see sort of in the training of filmmakers, you see a certain development. So in the 60s, the big film studios started to collapse and outsourcing production and stop producing films themselves and basically only distributing and exhibiting films. And so a lot of directors that were contract directors at big studios suddenly didn't have work anymore. And certainly young people that wanted to get into the film industry had no place to work and no place to train, right? So they're basically from the mid-60s onward, there's only one avenue for an entire generation of filmmakers to get into the film industry and to be able to train and make films on a regular basis, and that's pink film, right? So basically the sex film industry. Where a lot of interesting films were also being made because people had a lot of freedom as long as they had 5 or 6 quote-unquote erotic scenes in the film. They had a fair amount of freedom to experiment with story and so on and so on. So you can see an entire generation of mainstream filmmakers that later on become very successful. So a few years ago, Departures, a film called Departures won the Oscar for Best Foreign Film. Takita Yojiro is the director, and he emerged from pink film, right? That's where he trained and where he was able to shoot 6, 7 films a year sometimes, because these films are shot in just a few days often, right? But then afterwards, pink film also becomes less of a training ground, and film schools start popping up. So film schools become more important, and that elicits one big change, and that's that you have much more female directors coming out of film schools, right? So entering a film studio or a pink film set was very difficult. As an assistant director, it was very difficult for women, right? Even if they wanted to become film directors, the hurdle was very high to being accepted, right? And there are some exceptions, but very few. But film schools kind of enable a different kind of access, right? And that hasn't had a strong enough effect on the film industry as a whole, but it has had some effect.
Sure, yeah.
And one other avenue is, of course, coming out of what's called jishu film. In English, it's kind of tricky what to call it. If you want to call it amateur film, that's not quite the right term, because a lot of these people are accomplished filmmakers, but they're working in 8mm or video formats. Independent film is tricky because there aren't any studios anymore, so independent from what, right? But in Japanese, often called jishu film. So the kind of films that are shown at PF Film Festival. And PF Film Festival has been immensely important historically for trying to create a bridge between kind of that world of jishu film production and the world of kind of corporate or business-oriented film production, right? And has been almost the only kind of continuous bridge between the two. And you can see the influence of PF Film Festival written all over the Japanese film industry, right? So what's going to happen now that actually even more or less professional level film equipment, camera equipment, editing equipment, and so on, is accessible to a larger degree of people, that's going to be really interesting to watch for the next 10 years or so, I think.
I've actually been thinking quite a bit about this, what do you translate jishu eiga? And I want to pose so I come also from I'm in a rock band, and I play rock music here. And I'm in the world of DIY music scene, which I think it somewhat applies. There's indie music, which is indie rock and roll, and then there's also the DIY, which is the do-it-yourself, and that's still quite a scene, and it's quite something. And I always think that's kind of an interesting. I want to say it's like DIY filmmaking, maybe. Anyway, that aside, I want to open this up to questions. We have. We can continue to keep talking about this, but I do want other voices involved. We have maybe about 10 minutes or so. But we have one dire question over here.
Okay,
can we wait for the mic? Yeah.
One of the movies shown at this year's Japan Cuts, which I liked, and I find myself liking more as I think about it, was Low Life Love, which was about making movies. And the producer was a guest here, and he said they shot it for $50,000 in 8 days, which amazed me. And I wanted to know whether this is common in Japan. And the other question was, given that low budget, all the actors were people we recognized from other films, which would not be true in the United States. I mean, if you've got that low a budget, it's your friends who are acting in the film. So I was amazed that they could afford these actors, and that these actors would, act in these films. So I want to know how prevalent that whole thing is.
その予算は普通です。
So, in terms of that budget, $50,000, that's the norm in Japan, actually.
ある方です。
That's pretty good. $50,000 is pretty good, I would say.
今や1 million yen. Some producer asked the filmmaker 1 million yen budget. It's crazy. And last year, the one film really success, the 100 yen no koi, was got lots of prizes, and also they got big income. So the producers start to learn we can make the such low budget film. That budget was 1,500 万円. Can make 10 times income or something. And so the producers start to ask the filmmakers to make the film like that. So crazy situation. Really bad. But budget の話をしてると暗くなるんでやめましょう。
So this was actually 100 Yen Love that did so well. It also showed in Japan Cuts last year. And it had a box office proceed of 50 million yen. So a lot of the producers clamored towards this project and say, we need to make films like this. But speaking about budget and the business side of things makes me quite depressed. So
50 million yen, by the way, is about $15,000.
But actors really dedicate. No, actors also crew really dedicated for film, and especially actors. There's some agency, the actors agency, try to produce the film nowadays because it is the best way to promote the actors. So as a promotion tool, the film have some sort of the position. So
and they have a say, like they have a power to input, to make a input to like say, well, you need more close up of our talent, otherwise there's no film, or that kind of pressures is constantly given to directors.
And also the film has a power to produce the actors in all over the world, because the films coming to film festivals. So many actors agency wanna show the film in Cannes. Cannes is the big purpose for them. Yeah.
Christina, wait for the mic.
Thank you. I came to this panel to ask this question, so I'm super excited I get to ask it. Last year, we showed, Japan Cuts showed a film called The Eternal Zero, or was it 2 years ago? I forget.
2 years ago.
2 years ago. And there was there were a lot of articles here in the States about the sort of political leanings of the film. I actually had friends who who refused to go see it. And also in the news currently, Busan International Film Festival in Korea is having all kinds of problems because they showed a documentary about the seawall ferry sinking. And the government is trying to pull out funding and fire all the people and frame them for corruption. And so what is the current climate in Japan involving politics and the business of film?
The politics is going towards really right. It's almost, in my opinion, it's going towards the fascism. I mean, it's a strong word, but that's what it is, I think. So I'm very concerned about the political climate. Now, both parliaments are dominated by the LDP, and their coalition has 2/3 of seats. They are immensely powerful. They can do anything now. And Abe is trying to rewrite the constitution, and not only the Article 9, which is famous for renouncing the wars, but also they are trying to limit our human rights. For example, freedom of speech. We have Article 21. They are trying to rewrite it. And that's actually a very serious situation. I mean, it's possible that we will have no democracy if worse comes to worse. So yeah, I'm very concerned. And Eternal Zero was written by this very right-wing revisionist, and he is a friend of Prime Minister Abe, and and I'm concerned. The view of Eternal Zero is very, I believe, very revisionist way of looking at the wall, and that became a very successful film, and a lot of young people watched it. And if their perception wall is coming from that movie, it's very twisted. Yeah, so I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I want to say, I think one thing that we've been finding as programmers, and I think just historically speaking, when I think movies and art that's put out during a period of time, I think is in relation to the political climate. And just so kind of, because we're running out of time, I do want to sort of wrap this up by posing a final question about, so we're in this strange political climate, not just in Japan, but also US, everywhere right now. But that all said, what do you think is the next, what's a representative of like the next kind of filmmaking wave that you see happening? Now that we're in these, we've been showing films for the last 10 years, and I guess, thinking about, I think Alex posed the question earlier about, it's interesting to think about, so what's kind of the next kind of filmmaking, or what kind of wave are we going to see next? Like, do you have any idea of what we might be expecting to see as we move forward? Or what are you thinking about when you say it's interesting to think about?
Well, so I think there are a number of things, and of course we can only speculate. But I think I would pinpoint two things that I think at the moment are interesting developments. And one is, in terms of the more corporate side of things, a series that is now since I think a month or 1.5 months ago available on Netflix worldwide, a series called Hibana, which is the first TV series produced by Netflix Japan. And that was based on a best-selling novel and prize-winning novel by a young comedian. And it's about the life of a young comedian, kind of 10 years in his life and his relationship to another older comedian that he admires, and it's a very rocky kind of relationship, and their career goes through different kinds of ups and downs, and it's a very interesting series. If you have time, definitely check it out. It's available on Netflix with subtitles. And that's an incredibly interesting development. If you watch Hibana, it's actually much more cinematic than a lot of Japanese film is at the moment. And the director of Hibana is Hiroki Ruichi, one of the well-known kind of mainstream directors in Japan that's also screened at foreign film festivals quite a lot, who belongs exactly to that generation that was trained in pink film. So he also originally worked in pink film. And this was produced together with a talent agency. But the really interesting thing about it is that it was available in, I don't know how many, over 100 countries on the same day, with subtitles in all kinds of different languages. So that's a very different model of how film can circulate, and it's a 10-part series, but those borders are starting to get fuzzy, right? Theatrically released film and film released on TV or other kinds of streaming venues and so on. so that how that development plays out, because now suddenly there's a party that's interested in circulating these kinds of films outside of Japan, and what kind of projects come after this, because it's been fairly successful outside of Japan, not actually quite as much in Japan. But very interesting developments might come out of that, because that means that there's a different kind of money flow that doesn't come from the traditional TV industry with all its restrictions on content, because certain things then can't be broadcast on TV, or the sponsors might be upset, or so on and so on. That might turn out to be really interesting, and might turn out to be very terrible and just a new kind of restrictive structure as well. And the other thing I think is that there's also a general development away from what we might call cinema to moving image production in a more general sense, which takes place on platforms like YouTube, or in Japan, Nico Nico Doga, and other areas that aren't really yet at this point a business in that sense, and a lot of it exploits the people actually that are uploading films and making materials and remixing stuff and uploading it. But there's a humongous, immensely large culture of image production that is taking place completely outside of the film theaters and the traditional film industry models, and how that will develop, I think, is really, really interesting.
Yeah. Soda Kantoku.
We are in a very interesting time, I think, in the whole system. I mean, film industry, actually the way we watch films is changing a lot, and we don't know which direction we are going. And in 10 years, we might have no movie theaters anymore. I mean, that's possible. And then do we die with cinemas? I mean, what do we do? I mean, I'm a filmmaker, and personally, I want to defend cinemas. I mean, this experience of watching films in theaters is what I like about it. And that's the reason why I got into filmmaking. So, yeah, personally, I'll do what I can do to defend this way of watching films in cinemas. And I don't know how, but
keep coming to the movies, everyone.
That's one way of defending cinemas, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, Araki-san.
はい、私は映画祭というものをやっている立場としては、映画はスクリーンサイズで映すものだとして監督が作り続けるということを想定に仕事をやっていくというのはもう決まっているんですね。でこれから若い監督たちを見ていて思うのは、やっぱどんどん自由になっていってすごいチャンスを彼らは自分たちで掴んでいくだろうと思います。でジェネレーションチェンジがここ数年であっという間に起きると思います。もう今までのやり方でやる人はみんな役立たなくなるというのがあっという間に来るというのを私はすごく感じています。で、そうですね。
So as someone that works in film festival, I will say that I do my work based on the idea and the belief that a film needs to be shown on the screen and it needs to be made by the director, the filmmaker. But with that said, I know that the younger generation of filmmakers today have immense freedom and opportunities and chances. And I know that there will be a very rapid generational change that will occur very soon. And the old ways of doing things will become utterly useless.
で全く状況は苦しいですけど、私は完全に未来に対しては明るい希望しか持っていないっていうか、それを感じるんですね。やっぱり若い人たちの作る映画、この後にある道っていう映画を上映するんですが、去年のグランドプライズですが、感覚が全く違うんです。 その感覚の全くの違うっていうのを皆さんにぜひ感じてほしいなと思っているんですね。
So the situation may be quite difficult right now, but in terms of the future, I have all the hope in the world, and I feel a lot of hope. And I'm going to be showing their short film that won the Grand Prix at the PF Film Festival this year, and you will be amazed that the sensitivity of the younger generation is completely different. I think you'll be able to witness that from this work.
で、ちょっと補足したいんです。さっきプサンの話がありましたけども、プサン映画祭を潰されるような騒動になった映画はドキュメンタリーなんですけれども、フェリーボートの事故のドキュメンタリーは、あれは政府が隠したかったことが入っていて、それを上映したから大騒ぎになって、それがきっかけで、でも逆に言うとプサン映画祭は独立性を、インディペンデンシーを獲得したんですよ。もう必ず市長が映画祭の責任者になるというシステムから自由になれたんですね。逆に結果的に良くなったんだけども、プサン市からのお金があまり入らなくなって営業しなくちゃいけなくなったのは苦しくなったけれども、それと永遠のゼロは全く違うと思うんですね。
So just as an aside, you mentioned the Busan Film Festival and the whole controversy on all the pressure on the festival to take down the festival because of the ferry boat incident, and this stemmed from the government's wish to a lot of things to hide about the issue. But I think the festival itself, the Busan Film Festival, really won independence because of this incident. They really emancipated themselves from the need to depend on the mayor to be responsible for this film festival. But now they have this situation where they're not financially dependent on the city, so they need to promote themselves now, starting today. But their incident, their situation, and the situation with Eternal Zero is completely different.
永遠のゼロは単にヒット映画を作りたかっただけの映画で、そこには誰も政治的なことを考えるということは目をつぶっている映画なんです。だからそのヒット映画を作るということと政治とを絶対に切り離しているっていうのは日本の映画の作り方で、今回私たちのOne of the Jury Member はプロデューサーオブ永遠のゼロなんですけど彼は素晴らしいプロデューサーなんですよ。で、その辺の話をちゃんとしておきますので、またご報告したいと思います。
So, in regards to Eternal Zero, I think the motive behind Eternal Zero was simply to make a hit film. And I think that film is completely blinded to what's happening politically. And to speak largely about the Japanese film industry, there's a tendency to separate the idea of making a hit film and making a political film. So, one of the jury members of PF Film Festival is actually the producer of Eternal Zero, and he is a remarkable producer. So I just wanted to mention that.
でも、リマーカブルという言葉はちょっと。
Maybe not remarkable, a very skillful producer.
So one of our nominees this year, one of the 20 film, is about ANO Zero, how it's hateful, stupid film, the one filmmaker talk. So that's really good, balance. The nomination film is really hate ANO Zero. The jury member is producer of ANO Zero. Really nice.
Right, so, and as Araki-san mentioned, there is a screening tonight at 6:30 of A Road, which did win the Grand Prix at PF Film Festival. So I'm sure all of you in this room really want to see it. If you don't have tickets, there are still tickets available. It's also preceded by a short, Born With It, by director Emmanuel Osei Kufor, who is actually here and will be introducing his short. I really hope you stick around. I'm so excited to see it in the big theater on the big screen. So now that concludes our panel discussion. I wish we can continue to talk, but I'm very grateful that you're all here. Thank you so much to our three panelists.